And Graham, you're good to go.
All right. Well, good evening. Welcome to the fourth, fifth. I don't even know at this point how many Takodah History Talks that we have done. This topic tonight is a personal favorite of mine, even though it's a crazy story. It's a personal favorite because it's one of the first projects I ever took on where I did a real deep dive into some history of Takodah and learned things that just truly stunned me. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of those with you tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm not going to say it. I'm just going to look for it. And there's the thumbs up. There it is. All right. So tonight we're going to talk about the hurricane of 1938, or as I call it, a tale of two Takodahs. Because at Camp Takodah in Richmond, where we are now and have been for nearly 100 years, well, actually 100 years. We've been there. This would have been the 101st. So there's really what Takodah was before the hurricane and what Takodah was after the hurricane. And they are two very, very different properties, believe it or not. The picture you can see on the screen now, I am about 99% sure that that woman is Aunt Kate Davis. We called her Aunt Catherine Davis. Kate was an absolutely wonderful woman. You may recognize the name Davis Field is named for her husband, and Kate and her husband absolutely loved Takodah. They were huge benefactors. Oscar was wonderful at getting Kate to cut checks and did it quite often, but she also did some other pretty amazing things. For example, Kate personally wired the office building. She literally electrified the building and actually helped to lay the copper wires. Now that is Kate in front of one of the buildings. You can see it is smashed over, and we'll talk about that a little later. Now I know the folks that are on the phone know who I am, but because, come on, we are recording this, in case somebody else sees it, I'll repeat just so you know who I am. My name is Graham Noseworthy. I am a holder of 16 of a CT-16. I was a camper in the 80s. I'm a parent of two current campers, a camper and a leader corps. I am a one-week program cabin dad. I am a Project 141 and COVID-19 response fundraiser, and I'm also the vice president of our board. I've studied our archives going back to December the 8th, 1913, when it all began. And I've done a lot of writing, including articles you may have seen in the Whispers, The Whistling of the Winds, which we'll talk about a little more, The Lost Takodians of the Second World War, and more. Just a reminder, the information sources. So where does all this stuff I get come from? Well, honestly, most of what you're going to see tonight comes from very detailed records that the Elwells left, and of course, local records. I even have a little book that I got from the Historical Society of Cheshire County called Night of Horror. And I'm actually holding it here. If you look in the camera for 2 seconds, and I'll take a look, show you that later when I stop sharing my screen. An eyewitness account of the hurricane of 1938 in southwestern New Hampshire. Fascinating read. Not a word about Takodah. So I was like, it's only so good. But I use a lot of sources, and I try to triple confirm. And as always, if I get anything wrong, I want you to tell me. Now, tonight we're going to talk about the first Takodah. Now, it's not really the first Takodah, because the first Takodah was on Tolman Pond in Nelson, but for the purpose of what I'm talking about tonight, we're talking about the first Takodah in Richmond before the hurricane and the second Takodah in Richmond after the hurricane. So we're going to go through all of that. We'll take your questions, and don't worry, I have something new to share, so I always like to do that. Now let's talk a little bit about the first Takodah. Again, a lot of you that are on this call, you're going to remember some of this stuff. But Takodah had very, very humble beginnings. I mean, very rustic. There was just nothing there. For a long time, there were two buildings, what we now call Hobby Nook, although it was not in its original configuration nor position, and the office building, which is in its original position, but not in its original configuration. It didn't originally have the extension on it that we now call the Bodo or back of the office, and a bathroom. It didn't have any of that on there. Camp was very, I mean, there was, you know, very little facilities, but a lot of work went into it. And by the time the Elwells got there in 20, if I remember correctly, it just really started to take off. So Daniel Lawrence was there for a couple of years. Then Victor Smith was there for a year as director. And then once the Elwells came in, it really went from being pretty rough to actually pretty great, really, really quickly. So a couple of pictures you're looking at here, you're seeing in the upper left corner, the original cabins, full cabins being built, some of which are still in use today. In the upper right is Jim Whitcomb. He is our one of the original carpenters we have. This picture, obviously, I now realize based on the tools a little later than 1919, but whatever, you get the drill here, right? That they were all working on it. This man right here, actually in this picture, is Elgin Jones. He actually not only did a lot of work at camp, but he named Takodah. And you can see Camp Street here. This is where the original tents and cabins were lined up. It was a straight shot from the office to the waterfront, which is now the Elwell Chapel. You can see the Hobby Nook in its original position and configuration here. It was just actually roughly where, I believe, where the old dining hall is now, and you can see them in front of it there. This is Oscar. This is Francis. This is a very, very early photo of them. So Camp Takodah in the 1920s is
Graham,
a very...
can I stop you for a second?
Yeah.
Ginny asked a really awesome question that I had no clue, but doesn't surprise me. She seemed to say that on rainy days, Uncle Oscar used to show a film of the hurricane, and she's wondering if we still have that footage.
So not only do we have that film, but I am reasonably certain that that film will rest about 4.5 feet below A field until the year 2026, is it? I forget what year it is that we're opening the Centennial capsule, but I'm pretty sure that's the one that I put in there. And I've been kicking, Ryan, I almost had you dig it up. But the good news is it's in a literally airtight, completely sealed, dry environment. It's actually probably better preserved there than it would be in the basement at Lake Street. But I could be wrong. It may be a different film that I put in there. But I know for a fact I've seen it. I know for a fact the film exists. And we have talked about engaging organizations like, Legacy Box to start transferring those films, because I am dying to see them. And there's piles of them. And it represents boys and girls sessions of every decade. So at some point, we do want to work on that. It's a great question. What you're seeing here is, this in the upper left corner, this is a great, real early camp shot. What you're seeing is these boys have just arrived. You can see all of their bags here. You can see how rough the original office looked, but I mean, like that post is still there. That, I mean, it really hasn't changed that much, right? But what's more important is you can see from these trees in the background that there's just nothing else there. I mean, there's nothing, right? This is what's called the toadstool. I am actually trying to get Artie to bring this back. I think it would be really cool. So let me explain what this is. If you look, you can see it's got drinking fountains and hand washing stations. Now, this is approximately, and actually maybe exactly, where the drinking fountain that is just near the office, just past the silence trees on the road to the waterfront, right near the flagpole area. You may know there's a drinking fountain. It's been there for decades and decades. I believe that actually is where the toadstool was, and that pipe is what originally fed the toadstool, which was destroyed in the hurricane. This was a really popular spot for not only being sanitary at camp has always been a thing. Clean hands, clean words, right? Like, it's legit. Going all the way back, cleanliness was next to godliness, certainly for Oscar and Francis, and they took that very seriously. But not only was this a cleaning station, but it was a very popular social hangout. And if we end up adjusting for COVID, in the future, one of the things we've talked about is putting up more hand washing and stations around camp. And at some point, I'd love to see us restore something that looks like the toadstool. You can see the Elwells holding court here in the old dining hall prior to the extension being put on. And I love this shot of these girls outside this canvas side cabin on Camp Street with this flag that just says honor over them. And I've seen a lot of photos with that flag. So camp was just really rustic. There was nothing. There was barely any plumbing. There was no electricity. You know, gender diversity was, and the familiar traditions we know now were taking hold. International staff were coming in. Francis and Oscar were traveling around getting the best of the best, and friendly to all was really becoming the name of the game. And as we get into the 19th
slide, Taylor asked if we could see the picture larger. I'm not sure which photo Taylor's talking about. Taylor, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and let us know which one you were.
The top left one with all the boys in a line together with all the luggage there. It's just, you can't really see their faces because it's a smaller one.
We sure can. 1 second.
I mean, it's such a great shot, but it'd be nice to see their expressions and their faces. If you can, that's okay.
Should only take me a second to find that. Oh, you know what? I know where that is. I know an easier way to find it than digging through my completely ridiculous files. And it is... I think it's Slade. Yep, I got it. So this, that's about, well, let me see if I can blow it up a little bit. So, I hit the wrong button. You. So this picture is important, and I'll tell you why. For those of you that joined me last time, and you may know about the World War II project, but I'm relatively certain that one of these boys right in here is Robert Henry Slade, Bob Slade. I'm going to share something a little later on as to why that's important. This is start of boys session, July 1926. And I believe Robert is in that picture, and I'll share why a little later. Great question. Feel free to stop me again. That's fine. So Ryan, if I'm on a roll, just jump in, please. As we get into the 30s, the growth and change that has been prevalent in the 20s is now becoming rapidly expanded in the 30s. Now, Camp Takodah has always been a place of constant growth and change. So it's funny to me when people are like, you know, I remember my camp and I want it to be the way it was when I was younger. And the reality is that it's not possible, right? Camp has always been in this state of growth and change. And that's a good thing because we've been growing and improving as we go. But as we get into the 30s, the property lines rapidly start to expand. We go from dozens of acres to hundreds of acres. We've got more people, more program. Fundraising is just through the roof at this point. And there were a lot of people that had a hand in that. A lot of people from Cheshire County and the Keene and Richmond areas. And of course, the facilities start to rapidly improve. Plumbing, electrical, and the kitchens actually become professionally run with cooks coming in from local schools. Before that, it was just kind of like, it was pretty rough. Really rough. And when Elsie Crowninshield came from the Northfield, Massachusetts Normal School, it was called, she arrived in 1935. This is Elsie in her kitchen right there. There she is. Food safety, food prep, food scheduling, a lot of the almost militant way in which our kitchen is run all started with Elsie. And in these notes that I have from Oscar, and I've got, you know, books upon books, Elsie gets a lot of credit. So the fact that we have a division name for Elsie, I can assure you, she deserves it. Native American studies were a big part of what we did there. In the upper right corner, this is Rosie Smith. She is a Native American from Oklahoma. She was studying at a college out there. I'm sorry, I forget the name of the college off the top of my head. But Rosie was one of many Native Americans that came to our camp. And what's interesting about Rosie is not only did they do these wonderful ceremonies and all sorts of things, traditions that hung on, but the teepee she set up survived the Great New England Hurricane unscathed, which was incredibly bizarre when you see what I have to show you. You can see the waterfront expanded. You can see Oscar's getting a little older. You can see the Hobby Nook here. Now, I think this is Hobby Nook. It had a funny name to it. I'm pretty sure it's Hobby Nook, but you can see in this corner here, there's the Takodah banner. That we have that banner still, which is crazy. And campers started doing a lot of work around camp. You can see this is what they called SUS gangs. I am not joking. This is what they were actually called. Shut Up and Shovel. That is a real thing. Shut Up and Shovel gangs were a real thing, and these kids loved it. They were hauling giant rocks. That rock right there is over somewhere between cabin C and T, I believe. They were hauling rocks. They were doing all kinds of work. They were painting, and they loved it. Oscar encouraged it. Now, everybody sort of worshipped Oscar a little bit and did whatever he said anyway, but these kids genuinely loved it. Every photograph I've ever seen of a Shut Up and Shovel gang, these kids are huge smiles. They're heaving rocks out of the ground. They're doing all kinds of stuff. And that played an important part a little later. Now, we get to the end of the summer in 1938. And Oscar commented to the board in his end of the season report that the summer had been one for the record books, which was not too uncommon a thing for him to say, but that's what he said. Takodah had its highest attendance in 1938. They had benefited from new activities for the campers, and they had enjoyed new program facilities on the property. The weather that summer had been wonderful. While we're sad to move out of the birches and we'll miss the sounds of happy children, he said, Francis and I will be looking forward to next summer, which we hope will be bigger and better. And bigger and better was something Oscar said all the time. I see it everywhere, in marketing materials, in his notes, in his end of the summer report, in his pleas for fundraising, in letters, everything. Bigger and better, bigger and better. Now, we get into mid-September. Here's the thing I want you to remember. Nowadays, you want to know if there's a storm coming, you look at your phone, you get an alert, click a button, you know. I mean, even all of our lives, we've had really good weather reports, right? I mean, even when I was a little kid in the 70s, let's go with little kid in the 80s. We'll stick with 80s. I mean, you knew when there was a thunderstorm coming. You turn on the news, you know what's coming. They did not have that back then. And the important thing I want you to look at is these on the right here. These are the storms from 1938. Look at the track of these storms. There is only one that turned north. They were completely unprepared for this monster that was on its way, and it was a monster. So they really, I mean, there was no tracking. They just didn't know this sucker was coming. When it hit with devastating force. It absolutely smashed its way through through New York, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts. The town that I grew up in, Northampton, Massachusetts, was pulverized by it. There are still watermarks and signs and all things all over town in Northampton, Massachusetts. This sucker pounded New England. It was remarkably powerful. We'll talk a little bit about its effects in just a second. But these are shots of the hurricane from right to left. That is storm surge hitting in New York. That is storm surge in the middle is storm surge hitting in Connecticut. And on the left, this is flooding in the immediate aftermath in Keene, New Hampshire. It was horrible. It was a Category 5 storm with highest winds. Now, this is how they measure winds. Whatever's sustained the highest for 1 minute, not a gust. Gusts exceeded 180 to 200, but the 1 minute sustained wind, I want you to think about that. 160-mile-per-hour winds sustained for 1 minute. If any of the structures any of us are in right now were exposed to sustained winds of 160 miles an hour, it's gone. It's over. Goodbye. Unless you live in a brick fortress, it's coming down. There were 682 to 800, and the numbers are rough because it wasn't that great back then, fatalities. This storm killed a lot of people. And it didn't just kill a lot of people because like, it's a long time ago and buildings weren't that great. If this thing hit now, we're talking thousands of people dying because there's way more of us, way more structures, lots more problems. There were many more deaths due to indirect damage or destroyed infrastructure, illness, homelessness. This thing really did a lot of damage. So the cost was about $306 million in 1938, or about $5.6 billion in 2020 United States dollars, making it among the most costly hurricanes to strike the United States mainland. The affected areas: New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, and Quebec. It went all the way up and tried to turn back around before it finally was done. The Long Island Express, as it was called. Let me tell you why it was called the Long Island Express. It had that name because it sounded constantly the whole night like a freight train. It whistled, it howled, it battered, it bashed, it destroyed everything. You can see it picked up this ship and tossed it onto the ground. It absolutely flattened seaside towns. It tossed buildings like they were toys. It flattened forests. It just absolutely pulverized everything in its path. And unfortunately, lying in its path was YMCA Camp Takodah. It took them a few days. They could not get to camp for a couple of days because the roads, I mean, there were no roads. I mean, it was brutal. I mean, the Keene and Richmond area was pulverized. So it wasn't a matter of, somebody coming down from Keene, I forget the route there, that 32 or whatever it is, but they just couldn't get there. And even Harold Dickinson, who lived in the White House that is across the street that we now is part of our property, he couldn't get into camp because you couldn't tell where camp was. I mean, you could orient yourself naturally, but the road was gone. Everything was gone. And so what you're looking at here is this top picture is a view from on top of the water tower. I want to remind you, there used to be a pretty sizable water tower. The cast eyelets for the guy wires and the cement caissons are actually still behind Hobby Nook. They had to get an aerial view. In fact, they actually had to charter an open cockpit airplane to circle slowly over camp because they couldn't figure out where anything was. It was flattened. Let me tell you how bad the damage was. If you were standing on the office porch, you could clearly see Cass Pond, boats on the water. You could see everything. You could see the whole pond. If you were standing on, then it didn't exist, but if you were standing on B Field, you could see cars driving by on the road. The forest was absolutely pulverized. I have no idea what this picture is up in the upper right. I mean, obviously that's one of the cabins, but I mean, you just can't tell. I believe this building, actually I know this building and this building, these are two different views of the Hemlocks. Clearly this is the waterfront. I'm going to tell you a fantastic story about that in a couple of moments. I think this is a corner of dining hall, maybe. I mean, it's really hard, but the damage was just really, really, really bad. This is Camp Street here. This was a massive tree that came up and just smashed one of the buildings to pieces in the background. These are the trees that gathered at the bottom of the iron water tower. The water tower eventually had to be taken down because what had happened is the wooden cistern at the top, it had a slanted roof on it that was blowing off. They never even found it, which is crazy. A big roof of a water tower gone. And it was pulverized. So many pieces had perforated it like bullets that it had leaked all its water out and was destroyed. you can actually, if you look in this picture here in the upper right corner, you can actually see Cass Pond in the background. You can't see Cass Pond from up above anymore. And then this is the waterfront. Here's what's incredible here. When Oscar went down to the waterfront, they looked around and said, where's the dock? You know, one of the rafts was there, but they couldn't find the dock. When they found it, it was clear at the other end of the lake. So what you're looking at here to orient yourself is, imagine you're standing roughly where the dock is now, and you've come out and you've turned to the left and you're looking down Cass Pond. Okay, so like this is roughly where the zip line is, kind of thing. Follow me? And that's the dock sitting at the end. And you can see it's got its diving tower attached to it, and the diving tower is tipped over. Here's the remarkable part. When they found it, they discovered it was completely undamaged, other than the tower had tipped over. That was it. It wasn't buckled. It wasn't broken. It was fine. And what they surmised is that in the middle of the hurricane, a micro tornado had formed and had literally lifted the dock right out of its crib and just put it down on the far side of the lake. It didn't roll, it wasn't pushed, it wasn't damaged, it was just sitting at the far end of the lake. Absolutely remarkable damage. And Oscar was devastated. The man was devastated. Here is his career, his love, his passion, a program, a property, a people he knows are remarkably important to the area. There are, hundreds of children that depend upon camp being there. And now what the hell is he going to do, right? This is literally the moment where he's sitting there and saying, oh my God, I've put, almost 20 years into this place. Now what am I going to do? And in that moment, Oscar decided, and let me tell you something, he could have said, that's it, we're done. Forget it. Sell the logs. I don't know what we're going to do. It's over. He made a decision, and I know this because he wrote it all down. He made a decision in that moment, literally sitting right there at the waterfront, to immediately get moving, to be ready for 1939, and to focus on more sunshine, on more room for play. So at no point, the look on his face says to me, there may have been a moment where he's like, I don't know. But at no point did they give up. They took an initial survey, they formed work gangs, and they got to work. Now, let's take a look at what we're looking at. Whoa. What you're looking at here is the entrance to Camp Takodah. That is the camp road. Take a look at that for a second. You can see the car here. There is no camp road. Not to mention, look at the sky. The next time you go to camp and you're level on the road, look up. You can't see that level of sky. The forest was just gone. There's Kate again. This building here, I'm down in the middle, and is my mouse appearing, Ryan, when I'm moving it around? Okay. So this building in the middle, this is the original Twins. This is one of the very first permanent structures that we erected at camp, besides, I should say that was net new, meaning Hobby Nook was like brought in from another place, buildings were brought in, tents were brought in, cabins were moved around. This was one of the first permanent structures. And in the hurricane, what happened was the Twins were lifted up in the air. The porcelain was all smashed out from under the building, and then the building was slammed back to the ground. So unfortunately, that one had to be taken down. So what we have come to believe is the original Twins is only half the original Twins, because the other half was destroyed. It was gone. You get a little better shot of Camp Street here, looking up towards the office. In the background, another tree tipped over. This is one of the work gangs. This is literally one of the shut up and shovel gangs that were coming in on after school, on the weekends, coming in to help. And you can see these guys here with these sweaters. Now, I don't think that what they're wearing here are T for Takodah. It's got to be from a school, or it's got to be from something else. I don't think we ever made anything that said T for Takodah, but it's possible. I've seen them a bunch of times. But the point is that Oscar didn't say, hey, I have endless money, so I'm just going to hire somebody to fix this. The man called in every favor, every volunteer, every alumni. If you love Takodah, you come fix Takodah. Kids were sending in dimes and pennies. People were writing checks, sending in their dollars, bringing trucks, saws, equipment, anything they could bring to come and help. And help they did. I love this shot of Oscar with a two-hand saw working with one of these gangs. And they just got to work. I mean, they were relentless. The work went on all through the fall of 38, through the winter, right through the winter. I mean, they literally did not stop working through the spring. And what Oscar said in his report to the board is, Takodah may have changed in physical features, and I'm going to tell you how in a minute, but we maintained the same loyal friendliness and excellent cooperation. We will miss those beautiful hemlocks, but we will get more sunshine and develop a larger parade ground. Camp will look different to we old timers, but you can be sure the changes may prove to be a great advantage. Now, let's think about that whole statement for a second. This man's dream is crushed. The property he has put into for a long time is destroyed. They don't have a lot of money. They don't have a lot of resources. And his reaction is, more sunshine, we're going to develop a larger parade ground, and these changes are going to prove to be a great advantage, and by God, he was right. A field is bigger because of the hurricane. B field exists because of the hurricane. The whole area where our flagpole sits now was a hemlock grove. It exists because of the hurricane. Huge areas of camp changed because of the hurricane, and they changed and proved to be a great advantage. But again, he had to engage the community during reconstruction, much the same way we are working to engage our community during COVID-19. These are not things we can take on ourselves. They take a village. So the cleanup for just camp alone was initially estimated at about $10,000 in 1938, or the equivalent of $178,000 in 2018 dollars. So that I did that when I originally did this research. But it would soon dramatically rise from there to an amount that's closer to an inflation-adjusted value of about $500,000. And that's because it proved to be, it's one thing to take the trees out. It is a whole different ball game to take the stumps out. And, you know, they at first were like, oh, the buildings look okay. They were not okay. There was some real fantastic things that happened. For example, a couple of the cabins were just picked up and tossed, and almost like they had been picked up and moved into a different configuration. They were just torn from their footings, but they were still okay. So cabins had to be moved back. Rosie Smith's TP was just sitting there unscathed. And this is the kind of thing that happens in hurricanes. You'll have just like tornadoes, right? You'll have areas that are devastated and you'll have a little patch that's fine. There's no rhyme or reason for it. It just happens. The backstop was totally fine. You could have played softball the next day or kickball the next day. It was just sitting there. It was fine. There's no rhyme or reason. But many of the buildings had to be just flat out removed, repaired, and rebuilt, or we took advantage of the opportunity to newly create buildings that had to suit the changes that had been made to the property, right? So if you have more open spaces and you're going to have more sports, well, you need buildings that are going to be able to house the equipment and handle things like that. Now, camp was ready for opening day in 1939, which again it's extraordinary, right? I mean, it's just extraordinary that they went from a nuclear bomb hitting it to rebuilt and relatively okay to open in 1939. They had to be bigger and better. That's it. That's the mission, right? That's hard stop. That's what they had to do. But it took over 10 years before it really started to actually look normal again, and I'll explain that in a minute. And even today, you can see the evidence of the storm. If you stand out on Mem Lodge porch and you look across, there's that very distinct hill shape to the shore across the line. If you look at it, you'll see trees that are all uneven. And a few of them look bizarrely uneven. Those are hurricane trees. Those are trees that survive the hurricane. Everything else is at a more consistent lower level because those are new trees. And we'll talk about forest management in a minute. If you walk through the woods, you will find very, very old rotted trees. Now, these are the trees that would be like soft to the touch. And those are trees that came down in the hurricane. And I'll tell you how you can tell. For the most part, they are all facing the same direction. That's how you know those are hurricane trees. And in other places, like there's one on the edge of B Field, it's not as bad as I thought it was, but if you look, you can kind of tell. There are some trees where they only have like branches on one side of them, and that's because the branches were all ripped off the rest of the tree during the hurricane. So if you just walk around camp and you kind of pay attention, you'll see some trees that look really funny. Those are hurricane trees. On the left here, you can see a promotional piece that Oscar put out when they were putting out the call for help, for funds. You can see it's a friendly, popular camp. I mean, so here he is talking about how camp is badly damaged and showing these pictures of Twin Oaks and the dining hall and, you know, Uncle Oscar posing dramatically for the damage to the old twins and the diving tower and sorry sight for the wharf, right? But he's also mixing it in by saying, hey, we're a popular camp. We got to be open in July. We got boys coming. We got girls coming in August. We had 320 campers last year. We're going to have 450 next year. So we really need your help. And so we'd been open for 22 seasons. We weren't going to stop. We had to keep going. And you can see at that point, we had 200 acres, 31 buildings, fine equipment made possible by friends of boys and girls. So what he's saying here is, this place has been beaten up, but we all built it once together. We're all going to build it together again. Let's talk a little bit about what happened, because I'm telling you, these forests were sitting on the ground. Okay, I mean, you walk around camp now, it's a heavily forested region. Well, the reason for that is because throughout the early 1940s, thousands upon thousands of saplings were brought in by the truckload and around the clock were planted by hand all over camp. Now, these areas, and it's very obvious when you actually go and look now, and it's great because the folks that are listening to this, whether it's live or recorded, you're going to notice things at camp now that most people just don't, you just don't see it. If you're not looking for it, you won't see it. But these areas now comprise locations including the Ropes Course, the North Village, the forest near the Craig Dining Hall, the area surrounding the eastern side of May Lane, so that's over here, right? The Ropes Course, which we know is in here, the area surrounding the dining hall, and including whole patches over here. See how the pattern of these trees is totally different from other areas? And if you go walk around the ropes course, what you'll notice is that the trees are either in rows, that's why it's perfect for a ropes course, or they're all the same type of tree. Then you'll go other places around camp and you'll see the forest looks crazy because that's a normal forest. The other areas are not normal forests. They were planted by hand and they were planned and they were coordinated and they were built on purpose. The area that is currently used by the ropes course was built to be a ropes course. They thought it through. The area that's the eastern side of May Lane, and that's up in here, okay? So this is A field, this is B field, this is the road into camp, right? So the areas like where the lagoon are, these areas over here were planted to just be protection, blocking the view and protecting camp. And that's exactly what they were. So you have to think about, we're talking hundreds of acres were completely reforested by Takodians. That is extraordinary. And if you walk around to some of the other areas, I've actually, it's funny to use this term, but I've actually circumnavigated Cass Pond. I know it sounds like I went around the world, but it's actually somewhat tricky because of these wetlands. But I did it with my kids because I wanted to see what it looked like in the areas that hadn't been forested by hand, and they're very patchy. So you can see there's these wide open areas, there's wetlands. It's very, very different looking from the areas that were done by hand. So if you look closely, You can tell by the unusual orientation, spacing, matching, and age of the trees themselves. They're in lines, they're all the same, or they're all the same age. They were planted by us, by Takodians. The larger parade ground, which is where the flagpole currently is, was expanded. Originally, that flagpole was in front of the dining hall. It was cleared and graded, along with B Field was created, the Dickinson Park. So that is this area down here. So that where the Welcome Center house is, you know, right on 119 here, there's those fields. Those were totally created because a little micro tornado trashed that area, and they decided to leave some of these areas open. And a large portion of the beautiful and tall evergreens, they were lost. I mean, we had these spectacular hemlocks that were all throughout camp, but some of them are still there, and they remain scattered throughout the camp, and they also live on, as Oscar noted in the history, in the spirit of healing. And that is how the infirmary got its name, the hemlocks. Now, legend says that if you go behind Hobby Nook and you grab onto one of these eyelets on the ground that originally held the guy wires for the water tower, and you close your eyes, you can still hear the whistling of the winds. So if you have a little kid, I want to encourage you, get them back there, let them hold on, close their eyes, and see if they can hear the great New England hurricane of 1938. If you would like, you can search Google for Takodah Hurricane and look for the link to the whistling of the winds and the transformation of Camp Takodah, or just visit the history. Oh, I lost. Hello? 1 second.
Yeah, we hear you.
Is it working? Can't hear me, can you?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
I lost my audio for a second there. Sorry about that. You can visit the history page in our camp, and there's a whole article that I wrote about the hurricane that goes into more detail, but there's also a podcast you can listen to. It's got sound effects, and it's kind of a cool thing to listen to if you're in the car or you just need to distract some kids. Now, any questions? Anything else you'd like to know? Great shot of the water tower there with its top blowing off. Any other questions? I'm gonna take a drink here.
And while you're taking a drink, I was just going to add the link that Graham mentioned to the podcast and the full article. I just dropped that in the chat box. When it was first released, everybody fell in love with it. So at the beginning of this, I was also going to say that this is my favorite Takodah History Talk and subject. And the podcast is just amazing. I can't tell you how many people said that they absolutely loved it. So if you haven't listened to that podcast, I would certainly encourage you to do that, just because everybody loves it.
I have a question. So I noticed that you said early on in the presentation that you got a lot of, there was a lot of growth in the 30s, and that was during the Great Depression.
Yep.
I mean, the Depression was in 29, but then, you know, it went on for several years. But then you had all this growth that came and all these donations and whatever that grew the camp prior to the hurricane. And I find that very interesting.
So, you know, that is such a great point. And I have really, really looked at our financial records and all the stuff that we have. I mean, I literally have one of them right here, the treasurer's account from, I think this one starts in 1918. Goes for a few years, but I've read the records. There's almost no evidence of a Great Depression. It's extraordinary, Taylor. I mean, I almost, it defies belief that Oscar was so fantastic at fundraising, you know, through the late 20s and into the early 30s, that it never slowed them down. In fact, it's important to note that this is the first year since 1915 that our organization has not had some form of summer camp operations, okay? That we have been able to weather just about everything. But when it comes to safety, you know, we had to make that call this year. And I can tell you from reading the records, during 1918, it was close. 1939, it was close. They weren't sure if they were going to be ready because of safety. At one point, there was a scarlet fever outbreak. They weren't sure. But as I've gone back through, I find lots of things about outbreaks and war. What I cannot find is the Great Depression. I mean, there are some areas that talk about it, like, one of the things that he does mention is that some kids can't, quite frankly, afford to go, so they had to get more camper ships. So Oscar and Francis and the Dickinson family and the Ripleys and the Browns. I still serve with a Brown on the board. There's still Browns that go to camp. These people didn't just get individual donations from contributing Takodians. They went to all the banks and construction companies and logging. If you were in that area, Oscar didn't ask. He told you, by the way, you're going to cut us a check for $30,000 or $10,000 or $1,000 because I got to build this, do that. He just did it. And that was how they survived the Great Depression. What a great question. What a great question. I like to point out that we're always learning new things all the time. So this is something wonderful that just happened. This meant a lot to me. So last week we rescued this letter. You can see it on the left here from July the 16th, 1944. This letter was originally sent home to parents in 1944. It has a Sunday letter written by a camper on the reverse side. The letter is hilarious. It's totally like, I'm only writing you this letter because I have to. If I don't, they're not going to feed me dinner. I mean, the letter is from somebody named Spalding. It's absolutely adorable. This letter was for sale on eBay by an antique shop out of Spofford, New Hampshire. I tried to get them to donate it. They did not like that, so I bought it. We also bought a critically important photo of a flag-raising ceremony at camp from 1936 that's related to the lost Takodians of the Second World War project. But the key point comes in the last paragraph when the director talks about receiving a letter from Bob Slade. Captain Ted Hoffman of Peterborough and Richard Brown of Jaffrey were here on Saturday. We have just had letters from Bob Slade, Bob Schumann, Harrison Rendell, Dave Vinyl, Johnny Lane, and Bill Poor. Our greetings to each of you, the Elwells. Bob Slade would be killed in combat in Italy the following year. His name is listed on the Memorial Lodge dedication plaque, and you can read Bob's story, The Fastest Boy. And if you read his story, you can find out why he was the fastest boy as part of the Lost Takodians project on the Camp Takodah website. I was floored. I had never seen, I had only seen one mention of Bob's name related to the reason he's called the fastest boy in our records, and it floored me that we now have a record that talks about him. So I am now on the hunt for that letter that Bob, I have already put the call out to the elders of our tribe, trying to see if anybody knows where that letter might be. But it's just wonderful to find these little pieces. Our history just keeps popping up everywhere I look. And don't forget, I want you to share your Takodah history. It's a wonderful place. And if you have a story or you have a topic, now you've got me thinking about the Great Depression, and I'm going to have to look into that. I just know it. That's going to be my next thing. I can just feel it. So I want to know. There's more to come. My next Takodah History Talk, which will be on the 24th, I'm going to dive into the histories, which I already have them, of Buffalo Bob for the Buffalo Division, Elsie Crown and Shield for the Crown and Shield Division, and Ken Kingfish Klatka and Marty Fisher for the Kingfish Division. So I'll be digging into that. That's a picture of me actually sitting next to my father there in that really interesting yellow shirt my dad is wearing. Probably on opening day, we're getting some sort of briefing in the chapel. And then there I am, an incredible trendsetter, for some bizarre reason, wearing a sailor's cap on a field. And as always, I will say the day is done, gone the sun, and good night, Takodians. So if you have any last questions or anything else, let me know. Otherwise, this time I did it 6 minutes under schedule. Last time we went on for like 2.5 hours. So I'm trying to make it up a little bit. Anyway, thank you all for joining me. It's been wonderful to share the tale of two Takodahs with you. And when you walk around now, you'll know things and see things and recognize things that most of the people around you won't know. So enjoy.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, thanks so much, everyone. Hope to see you on the 24th for that last Takodah History Talk for now. And otherwise, have a great night. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Good night, Mike. Good night, Jenny. Good night, Taylor. Good night, Ryan.